afternoon, everyone. Oh, that's absolutely rubbish. Come on. Good afternoon, everyone.
Hey.
Fantastic. Let's make this fun. We've got 45 minutes. It's freezing. So I'm going to ask questions. We've got a panel, but please ask questions. Let's make this interactive. We can have a chat. There's enough here for us to have a chat rather than speak at you. So welcome to the Age of Creativity. I'm Daniele Fiandaca. I used to work in advertising. I'd say I don't really work in advertising anymore. I used to run agencies like Profero. I used to be the head of innovation at Shell. But most recently, I started a culture change business with Nadia Powell called Utopia. We go in and we help businesses be more entrepreneurial, more inclusive, and more purposeful. I'm talking to you about the age of creativity. And when we talk about the age of creativity, I'm going to get the panelists to tell you a bit more about what it means. There's really four things that we believe are driving a new age of creativity. So the first one is artificial intelligence. So if we look at artificial intelligence, and again, I think this is the first time when I went to South by Southwest 3 years ago that it really became one of the big trends, is you started to realise the power that artificial intelligence would do, which is that it would take away the routine from our day-to-day. So if we could allow artificial intelligence to take away the routine, how great would it be to then use that time to be more creative? However, that's kind of flipped, I think, as we go forward. What's interesting and what's more interesting is flipping the two letters around. So actually going from AI to IA, so intelligence augmented. So we're really seeing, as we get more data and as we get more information, the ability to use that information to be more creative and feed our creativity. The second thing is neuroplasticity. So I think I took my phone out of my pocket. But how many of you have heard of the term neuroplasticity? Put your hand up. Okay, so about 3 of you. So neuroplasticity is when people say you can't teach an old dog new tricks, fortunately that's just not true. Okay, you can. Our brain does have the ability to rewire. And that's fundamentally what neuroplasticity is. Our brain, we can train it to do new things. And so if I had a mobile phone in my pocket, the chance of me memorizing stuff automatically goes down. I've now done research because we're outsourcing our brain and our memory to Google. And there are some scientists that are very scared by that. I'm an optimist, and I think in history, whenever we've seen change, we as human beings have been able to adapt. So we believe we have the ability to have our brains do new and good things, and one of those is creativity. The third one is new platforms. So there is, if you like anything we say, we do have a book attached to this, but the reason I'm showing this book, which is Creative Superpowers, we did actually launch this on Unbound. So it's a crowdfunding platform. So we came up with an idea, which was this idea of age of creativity. We came up with this idea of new powers within that age, and then we asked people like you, do you think we should make this book? Fortunately, 350 people said yes, and we then started writing the book. So if you look at the platforms to be creative, we've never had such rich platforms to be creative and get the creativity actually to market. The fourth thing really is the ideas economy. So most of you in this room will either be from brands or will work with brands. And if you look at what brands are trying to do, they are trying to get their ideas to market quicker than their competition. And if we go back to the platforms, they're also trying to get their ideas to market often before their own customers, who are launching them on the likes of Kickstarter. So I'm going to get the panel to talk a bit more about why they think we're in this age of creativity. But I think this is a really useful chart when we look at business. So anyone in here, so put your hand up if you consider yourself creative. Very quickly, put your hand up if you're creative. Okay, so really, for those that didn't put your hand up, we spend most of our time as a consultancy going in convincing everyone they are creative. There's a brilliant Igbo word called akonuche, which means creativity, but directly translated means human ability. We were all born creative, and it's really powerful. And if we look at this chart here, creativity is the most desired skill of the future. So this is the World Economic Forum, and what they asked they asked the top leaders in the world, what are going to be the most demanded skills in the workplace now in 2015? And as you can see, creativity was at number 10. Then they said, what do you think are going to be the most important skills in 2020? And creativity jumps to number 3. And you could argue that complex problem solving and critical thinking has an element of creativity in it. Creativity is going to be the most valued skill in the future. So, very quickly, and we're going to talk about it in more detail, we believe there are going to be 4 creative superpowers that are going to help you in this age of creativity. So I'm going to ask you now, put your hands up if you think you're a maker. Okay? Put your hands up if you think you're a hacker. Got 3. Put your hands up if you think you're a teacher. Put your hands up if you think you're a thief. Okay, so the bad news is, we believe that unless you have a combination of all 4, you're probably not going to thrive in the future. Okay? The good news is, when we start talking to you about these skills, 1, you'll realise that you are one of those things, but secondly, it'll be very easy for you to start developing those skills. And that's really why I brought a panel. We've got 4 people up there. So Laura Jordan Bamback.
Hello.
Laura, Nadia Powell, I'm going to say straight away, apologises. She has childcare issues. She's my business partner. She was meant to be representing hacking, so there might be an absence of hacking on the panel. She apologises. But I am delighted that we will have, because Mark is on his way, we will have my co-editors on the book. So Laura Jordan Bamback is CCO of Mr. President. We've got Scott Morrison, who has the best job title in the world. So he's the founder and bringer of the boom. And we have Mark Earls, who will be joining, who is of the Herd Consultancy. So, and please, I'm going to do questions for about 10, 15 minutes, but please put your hands up. So the minute you've got a question you want to ask, just put your hand up and I'll come to you. Okay? So, I'm going to start with you, Laura. So
Okay.
Tell me what you think, what's the impact of the age of creativity for agencies?
No, I think agencies have gone through and are going through an incredible time of change. I think, that we've been discussing the end of agencies as we know it for quite a long time, but I do see that the only way that as agencies we can really survive in any kind of form going into the future is really focusing on the bit that we can do that the robots can't do. I think, technology platforms are coming and taking away a lot of the money that used to be spent, particularly in creative. Media is feeling it as well. I think the push in digital, which as someone that came from a digital place thought was going to transform the world into this incredible world of creativity in digital, hasn't happened. And actually the opportunities there are kind of even more remote and even more unsexy, I guess, than what they were. And so I think really, if we're going to survive as agencies, as creative agencies, we need to get with the creativity in a way that we've kind of forgotten how to do a little bit, I think, at the moment, or we've been too scared to do, or clients have, whatever has kind of caused our stagnation. I feel like there's a real stagnation of creativity a lot of the time in our industry that is going to have to change.
And so what particular things would you see agencies doing to solve that?
So I see interesting agencies, I guess Mr. President is one of them, kind of either moving more into solving, kind of letting creativity loose from advertising in a way. So going into organisations and solving bigger problems using creativity, I think. There's no reason that all of our fantastic thinking and insight and data that we have access to has to be used in making a telly ad or a poster or a digital whatever. I think actually we can make profound change within brands.
Right. And Scott, so what do you think the impact is on brands?
Good afternoon, everybody. Can you hear me okay? Because yes, there's a bit of a hubbub. I can't hear very much from back here, but I think the danger of the age of creativity is that we look at it through the lens of traditional, our own business. So we look at it through brands, and I'm an ex-CMO, so I used to be the marketing director for Diesel and Levi's and various other brands. Before that, I was agency side, so I was at Widens and Saatchi's. The danger is if you look at it through the lens of brand and agency, because frankly, what's happening is people just don't give a shit anymore. Consumers just don't care. And the age of creativity is about, there's as much empowerment happening for the consumer, in fact, probably 10 times much empowerment than we actually think is happening. So I was at an interesting talk the other day, and one of the phrases that came up is that we're all Uber's children. Okay, we're not, figuratively, we are all Uber's children. And what that means is the simplicity with which we order an Uber is the simplicity within which we believe our lives should be. So if you're a consumer, it's like, well, why can't I just have my coffee at my desk right now without having to pay for it with my card, and it be hot and it be exactly what I want? And why can't I just have my TV when I want it and upgrade it so it just arrives at my door? So all these things happen. There's a lovely graph that I sometimes use, which is customer expectation is growing exponentially like this, and it has been over the last decade. And most businesses are operating on what I call this kind of optimization for certainty. So they're operating on this line. And the gap between customer expectation and business reality is where disruption, and I don't really like that word, but it's where disruption is happening. So from a brand perspective, the minute that you start worrying about your own position and start trying to save your own bacon is the moment that you're in real danger. And I think the impact for brands is stop thinking about this sacred product-driven branding exercise that you think you have to do, and that you have to put out your product every time, you have to do all these different things that we do in a traditional business as usual perspective, and start thinking about how are you servicing or being of service or adding real value to that consumer expectation, that customer expectation. And the brands that I work with will start quite often with, oh, here's our next ad campaign, or here's our next platform, or here's our next product launch. And I'm looking at them in the face and saying, well, so what? Who needs another beer bottle? Who needs another? What about creating services? What about empowering your audience, your consumers, to be more engaged with your brands, to be more creative, or tapping into their creativity and using it as a real asset for your business? So I think in this age of creativity where I could tomorrow, or you could tomorrow, create a new $1 million product and put it on Kickstarter and be millionaires, you've got to question what role do brands play in our lives when we can do all the things that brands used to do for ourselves. And the only thing that you can really boil it down to is, as a brand, how do I create value and service and meet the expectations of my customer outside of the business as usual perspective, and use creativity as the driver for that?
So I'm going to, again, let's look at businesses, Scott, because we go into a lot of businesses, and I ask that same question about creativity, and we've also gone into a lot of agencies, and we ask the same question. We've probably spoken to about 1,000 people. We ask one question: where are you the most creative? Out of 1,000 people, not a single person has said work. Yeah, and that includes creative directors. You know, so what changes do you think businesses need to make to really utilise their creativity more within their people? Yeah.
Well, I mean, I think the first, if I go back to my immediate point, which is the most fruitful creative pool is often with your consumers. And what I mean by that is, when you're in a brand over a long period of time, and I saw this myself when I worked in various brands, you become so kind of inoculized to the world that you end up believing your own kind of hype, and in many ways believing your own bullshit. So you don't look out, so you don't step outside of your ivory tower. And you quite often, when I was in the fashion industry, the mandate coming from the top of the business was, we're a fashion brand, we make product, you buy it. And of course, that whole dynamic has been flipped on its head. I was doing some work with a fashion brand at the moment about the democratization of style. And actually, when you start tapping into your consumers and understanding their needs, that's firstly a really good place to find creativity, but also involving them in product development or involving them in the actual creative service provision that you require. I always have a firm belief that most of the solutions that you need are pretty much right in front of you if you know exactly where to look. And most brands, outside of doing research groups where you are putting stuff in front of people and asking their opinion, it's the wrong approach. We should be looking and speaking to people about what they really need, thinking and having them think about creative solutions on what that might look like, and then empowering either them to deliver them or indeed empowering the business to make those things real, and just step outside of the bubble.
And how do you keep creativity going with your teams, Laura?
Yeah, look, I think there are a couple of things that are really important. You touched on it first. No one is at their most creative at work, so let's stop pretending that that's the case. Let treat, I guess, our staff, if you're kind of lucky enough to have staff or your team or whatever, as adults, and make sure that you are putting in place. The creativity seems like a very ethereal thing, but there are certain things that you can do to really encourage like great ideas to happen. So, it's making sure that there is enough time to work consciously on a project, and then to have the subconscious take over and actually kind of build from all the things that you've been researching and thinking a really fantastic idea, your eureka moment. If you're working too much in that, I guess, in the that frontal part of your brain, you never make that amazing leap. You'll make good work, but you'll never make great work. So it's, giving people that time, giving people that space, making sure that people have flexible working, which is incredibly important regardless of why you need it. All of those things are key. I think the other thing that's key is to make sure that if creativity is nothing but bashing together different ideas and kind of pulling something new from a bunch of stuff that you already know, that you're making sure that your pool is big enough. So, diversity isn't just a nice to have. You're not hiring someone who is from a diverse background because you're, adding to your quota. And depriving someone who's really talented from a job, which is the excuse I hear all the time when people talk about diversity and why creative departments particularly are so middle class and white and male. But it's actually making the creative work better, because if you can get people from different socioeconomic groups, from different kinds of backgrounds, with different points of view, and it's messy and you're having a little bit of an argument about something, you will get to a better idea because you have more stuff going in.
So,
can I just quickly add to that? The other thing I think for brands as well is I see a really palpable difference when I work with brands and run sessions with them when we stop focusing on solutions, because the fact of the matter is brands come up, I'll put a brief on the table and most brands come up with the same solutions time and time again, whether it's an influencer program or it's an event or the energy level dips. And the way to get to better creativity is to fall in love with the problem. So specifically when we talk about hacking in the book, hacking these big challenges into really small, interesting problems and falling in love with the problem that is in front of you palpably lifts the energy of a group every single time without fail. Because when you fall in love with the problem and you really interrogate it and you understand it, you hack into it, it opens up so many different possibilities for creative solutions. And quite often we'll go into a session with brands and the first thing that will be on the table is a whole load of solutions that we need to choose from, and no one's in love with the solutions, and arguably the solutions aren't particularly good anyway. As soon as you fall in love with problems, your creative juices and your ability to think differently totally changes.
Thank you for introducing hacking. You both represent different superpowers within the book. Can you talk me through them? Talk through your superpowers and let everyone know what they are.
So I looked after the making section of the book. I guess I consider myself a maker. I make a lot of things. I'm not only sort of made Mr. President. I've, founded She Says. I founded Can't, which is the festival for people that can't go to Cannes. Danielle and I founded the Great British Diversity Experiment. I'm very, very kind of passionate and excited about making stuff, whether it's an organisation or a piece of work or what have you. So I was really excited about doing my chapter because the people that I was looking for to kind of write pieces in the chapter, I was really looking for people that represented a particular kind of making. I think, like I was saying before, we very much get stuck in just doing, and a lot of what we see as creative work I would not classify really as kind of making something that matters, that changes culture, that that leads the way, that kind of celebrates diversity, that's collaborative, that's like genuinely creative. And so I was lucky enough to work with 4 incredible authors from around the world who really represent very different but very potent forms of making stuff, kind of getting shit done.
I think it's really interesting because we spoke a lot about each of these sections, and I think making was interesting for 2 reasons. I mean, I'd like to ask you first, we had a big discussion about doing versus making.
Yeah.
Do you want to talk through that a bit?
Okay, so I guess my point of view is, like I said, even if you're working as a creative, 90% of what we do is doing. We're told to do something and we do it, and it's very much, we're craftspeople playing in a very confined space, I guess. Sort of making stuff with what we've got, doing stuff with what we've got. Where I see a maker is someone who can take that creativity, which I really feel is so important for leadership, because we're able to set this vision that other people can follow. We're actually genuinely able to at least try to change the world, right? With the stuff that you do. It's such a potent tool, and yet it's something that we never ever use. So I kind of see making as, people who are, it might be making a creative product, it might be making a new collaboration or what have you, but they're doing these things with meaning in order to create something that will change culture.
I think that was really interesting for me, because when we came up with the 4 superpowers, I thought I wasn't a maker. That was the one that I thought, because I saw a maker as someone that makes something with their hands, physical. But I think once we went into it, Token Man, Great British Diversity Experiment, and the books, actually making's probably one of my key superpowers, because bringing ideas to market is where you create change.
Yeah, absolutely.
So Scott, tell us about yours.
So teacher came from, I wanted to there's a traditional way of thinking about teacher, which is I have a load of knowledge, not me personally, but one has knowledge and imparts it onto others. And it felt kind of a very one-way street and a very traditional way of thinking. And that's not how creativity works. And the first instance of teaching and being a teacher is primarily that you start with yourself. And I found this wonderful quote from somebody called Alvin Toffler, who was what you call a futurist, and wrote a great book called Future Shock. And in the book, or his attributable quote is, the illiterate of the 21st century won't be those people that can't read and write. It will be those people that can't learn, unlearn, and relearn. And that, for me, summed up the whole principle behind teacher. Because in the fast pace of the age of creativity, it's very easy for us to sit on our laurels and go, well, I've learned all this stuff. So if I was sitting here with my diesel knowledge of the digital market when I was a CMO, I could talk to you really eloquently about MySpace and all those kind of things. But that would be totally rubbish for this audience, because you'd sit there going, we're just a dinosaur, like MySpace is dead. The point is, I learnt a whole load of stuff. And we do this all the time, whether you're a brand, whether you're an agency, whether you're whatever you are, you learn things and you think, right, I'm going to hold on to that. That's going to hold me in good stead for the whole of my career. But of course, you're just falling into the trap of being illiterate. Because unless you're unlearning, so if I don't unlearn very quickly that MySpace is hopeless, as is not talking about SEO and all those other kind of acronyms, then I'm totally illiterate and I'm of no use. And so if you're self-aware enough to be able to unlearn the things that are not meaningful for you, especially from a creativity point of view, and then relearn new things, get new perspectives, open your frame of reference up completely. So I'd go and learn a load of stuff about e-commerce and all that sort of stuff, but apply it to other things, particularly about creativity, in that we carry our portfolio of great stuff that we've done, that's all our solutions, and this is our bag of tricks. And the reality is half of those are probably of no use whatsoever, especially if you're a brand or an agency or an individual. So the skill and the thing that we talk about in Teacher is, what techniques can you use? How can you find the time and space to unlearn the baggage that you carry that is of no use to you and relearn it with new and interesting things that shape your perspective and help you become much more creative? And again, working with 3 wonderful authors who, and did you say author S's? I don't know, you say that. What would you say? Author, yeah. Writers, 3 wonderful writers who all gave a really different and clear perspective on the tools and techniques that they use, or the philosophies that they use, that help them constantly keep fresh, ahead of the game, using new perspectives, and fundamentally learning, unlearning, and relearning.
So on that one, one we hear a lot, and I think people when are coming around, everyone's overwhelmed in terms of time. You talked about time and space. How do people find the time and space to unlearn and relearn?
So I had this challenge the other day I do exec coaching, one-to-one coaching, and my coachee said to me, well, Scott, I don't have any time to do any of this stuff. And I very quickly said to that person, you need to reframe what it is that's important. So we can all sit here and say, I don't have time to do any of this stuff. But you wouldn't say, well, you don't have time to do the things that you love. I don't have time to spend with my family. I don't have time, you're spending time on something. So if you're prioritizing your time on stuff that's useless to you, then it's a bit pointless. And the reframing of what it is that's required is, my passion and my priority is how do I learn, unlearn and relearn, or how do I fill my brain with different perspectives? And once you reframe what it is that you're trying to do, you create intent, and automatically you'll start to get alignment. So you'll start to, funnily enough, find time to be extra creative. If you've got the right tools, one of the things we talk about in the book is street wisdom. So at the moment, you're all commuting, or you're all going out for lunch, or you're all walking to different places. If I told you that in those hour spots that you're currently using that time, well, you might not be using that time quite right now, I could give you a program, it's in the book, Street Wisdom, that turn that half an hour into meaningful creative thinking time. I'm sure you'd all go, oh yeah, I'd love to do that. So it's all about what is your frame of mind. Whatever you want to achieve and whatever it is that you want to do, if you want to be more creative, suddenly you will find the time to be more creative. But the more you use time as an excuse, the less meaningful time you will have to use. That's a good time for Mark Ellis to walk in.
So Mark.
You're speaking about
round of
time.
applause to Mark. So Mark, you're now talking about your creative superpower. What?
My creative superpower.
Which one were you? Which one?
Copying, thieving, stealing, taking it. In German, there are 3 words for it. Abwurfen. I can't remember. That was last week. It was all in German. It's the most amazing gift that we as a species have been given by evolution. The ability to use the work of other people, the ideas of other people, the behaviour of other people, to shape our own individual behaviour, and it's an essential part of creativity. Grayson Perry did a great couple of brief lectures a couple of years ago, and I don't know if anyone saw them, but he said, this is paraphrasing lecture 2, he says, originality is a people with short memories. Why bother to start with your own ideas when there's so much shit lying around that you could work with? And I know Laura and I have done stuff before together, and we go, that's the first place you start. What's here already? And indeed, the further away you go and work with stuff that's further from the field you're trying to solve in, the more interesting it is. So that's my superpower. Copying, stealing, thieving, nicking, homage, whatever you like to call it, I don't mind.
I'm thinking, Scott, at the moment, it's thinking, I wish I'd turned up late, so I'd be much warmer.
Scotty?
Can I just start seeing, if you want to ask questions, start showing me your hand so I know, are you seeing any movement? Anyone? No, I'm still not seeing any. Okay, we'll carry on. So Laura,
Yeah.
I want you, I think because we co-edited, you always want, because we curated, we brought people into the book, you always want people to say it's one of your people's chapters they love the most. And I hate to say it, but Laura has the chapter in her section that everyone loves, which is Mori, who is a legend Japanese producer and creative from Japan, who actually has just launched the book in Japan himself, which is fantastic. But why did you choose Mori? And especially his book talks about the key tips for making.
Yeah.
What really resonated with you?
I mean, I think I love his chapter as well because it's so practical. And just because I approached him at first because I have so much appreciation for his work. He's an incredible maker, and you will know some of his work. He did the OK Go video with the synchronized dancing and what have you. He's done some beautiful D&AD Ken award-winning pieces. He's one of the most kind of awarded Japanese creatives. And a really, really lovely guy. And I met him first through D&AD, and through him then, actually, I met Damien Kulash from OK Go. And it was the conversation with him that really sparked, I guess, my interest in making versus doing, really. So I was very lucky sitting around having a very nice lunch in Cannes with Maury and Damien. And Damien said, I just do not understand your industry. Like, I don't understand what it is, like how it is that you can work creatively when you plan everything out so far in advance to every single detail, what the vase is going to be on the shelf, what the, et cetera, that when you get to actually making the thing, all of those creative decisions have been made and there's no room for like humanity and happy accidents and playfulness. And he said his secret, and him and Maury had just made this film, what him and Maury had done is hired this huge warehouse in the outskirts of Japan, really cheaply, for a month. And they went in there and they just played with stuff. And through playing with stuff, they found these kind of weird little things and bits of serendipity, and they worked that into what the video was going to be. after, in a month's time, they had this incredible piece of work that is so beautifully crafted and so well choreographed, but it came through, I guess, experimentation and play and development by doing, not by kind of planning everything first. And that really kind of inspired me in terms of, like, he's right, like, what the fuck are we doing? With planning stuff and thinking about stuff for so long and actually not getting to the crux of making. So that was my inspiration for making. And then Maury as just a human is, as I said, he's so lovely and he's got such great tips. And they're things that I really believe in. So, he talks about, which I really love, kind of, I guess, not stuffing your head full of too many things before you get started, which is exactly what Damien was saying. And from someone whose work is so meticulously executed, it's lovely to hear that he uses this technique as well. It's also about, making sure that you're collaborating, which is, something I care about. It's about, he writes a lot about, I guess, speaking up and saying it straight, again, which I love. And actually, it's been really funny seeing the Japanese version of the book, because the first thing he said to me is, Laura, I'm really sorry, but we really need to do something about your cover in Japan, because it's just not going to fly. So, and I was like, I really like the cover. I think the cover design's great. And he's like, yeah, it's not going to fly in Japan. Let me just organise another D&AD pencil winner to design the cover for you. But, there was no kind of beating about the bush or anything, and I like that directness of his. So, yeah, he's a wonderful person.
We'll tweet it. I don't think we've shared it yet, actually, on Twitter, but the cover, the Japanese version is completely different. He's even did a limited edition version that's about that big. I forgot to bring you. I've got copies for all of you, but it's incredible. I mean, to be honest, the thing that's inspired me most, I love the fact he talked about the importance of sleep. Yeah. I'm now fixated on sleeping more, thanks to Fitbit, and I do actually sleep on average more. So Mark, so tell us about. I think it's really important that this book isn't about. Although it's creativity, we set it out, and it does have some people from the advertising industry, we set out for it to be a business book, so to go beyond. And I think, so tell us a bit about Alistair and really his experience in architecture and how thieving really changed the architecture world.
So Alistair Barr is an award-winning architect, and he's taught architecture as well throughout his career, which is an interesting thing, Scott, right? That throughout his creative career, building this successful business, he has also taken time out of his diary to teach students all of the time. Anyway, so he tells the story beautifully put. He says that for many years, many centuries, architects copied from the same limited number of books. Books based on Vitruvius, who was a Roman general engineer and architect, and that's where the Palladian style comes from, and basically the classical buildings were all built like that. We got really used to it, so we don't really see it anymore, but of the 50 state capitals in the US, 42 are based on the same Palladian design. And the White House is interesting. The White House, new country, new dream of humanity, it's based on a fucking Roman temple. So they've copied for generations and generations and generations. Something happened in the mid-20th century with the modernists, people like Corbusier and so on, who pretended that they weren't borrowing from anywhere. They were just creating pure lines, pure geometry. And they were great independent innovators. And therefore they rubbed out all of their sources. Because it's normal in an architectural work crit, that you go, and I had this thought from over here, and there's a bit like the problem that so-and-so solved in that particular bridge, and this particular hotel does that. I thought it was really interesting, and I've taken the tiling from a garden here. That's how they traditionally were done. But Le Corbusier and the modernists went, no, I'm an original, complete original. They rubbed out all their notes, if you like, and pretended that. And then, after that, in the second half of the 20th century, there were a very limited selection of books that they all had copies of. So if you go into an architect's office, by and large, you'll see the same things, the same tomes, with lots of Taschen, really beautifully photographed, lots of material science, very lovely. And so what Al did was he just threw all his practices reference books away and insisted that there was, in every crit, people should come with links, the laptop and a projector on it, with links to the things that they got their reference from. And he incentivized his team to find references from as far away from architectural practice as possible. So that's how it could be. We could do the same. Imagine at Cannes there would be an award for the best use of somebody else's idea or the weirdest place that somebody has been inspired by to make an ad. Wouldn't that be just fantastic? Don't think it's going to happen, but it would at least
money,
be...
it will.
If it makes money, it will, yeah. Yeah, weird idea that. But I think that's an example of how you could do it. When you find the same resources, the same research materials used by everyone in a creative department, you'll find the same shit. It'll come out exactly the same. When everyone looks at the same YouTube channels, copies the same comedians, it's the same art books, it's going to be the same. It might be nice and uniform and you might feel comfortable with it, but it won't be creative. So throw all those out to start with.
So let's start with, teacher, the best way to actually unlearn and relearn is to ask questions. So audience, who's going to ask a question? Thank you.
You spoke at the start about kind of falling in love with problem solving and not products. What's the best way do you believe, to kind of get people, potentially within agencies or organisations, to kind of change their mindset to start thinking about problems? Because I agree, I just always find it hard to get people into that kind of, I was going to say thought space, but I'm not a wanker.
I actually use a technique that was developed in Japan in the late 40s by Ishii Kiyagawa, I want to say, called fishboning. Well, it's called fishbone. And the principle of it is that you hack your idea right down into a really clear challenge. So you can articulate the challenge really clearly. And by the way, a lot of the time in agency and brands, people have a challenge that is defined by a series of KPIs that are ultimately meaningless. So it's having the right narrative around the challenge in the first instance that is critical. And then once you've done that, you assume that that's the effect of a whole series of causes. And the fishbone exercise is simply, if you've got the effect here, what are all the causes that are driving that effect? And I generally set them out. If I'm working with marketing clients, I use 7 of the 10 P's or whatever. So you'd have promotion, people, process, all these different things. And you literally brain dump all the different possible causes that might be impacting to cause the effect that you are seeing in the challenge. And what's fascinating is, when you do that, firstly, it disarms you from solutions, because halfway through, I always have to say to people, stop thinking of solutions, fall in love with the problem. But it helps you reframe. So a good example, I was working with a big airline business recently, and they were having trouble with their internal business. And they had all these new values and new brand stuff. And they said, I know exactly what the problem is, and nobody understands it. And our brand values are bullshit. So what we're going to do is we're going to change them all, and I'm going to get a new agency in to change it all. It's going to take about 18 months, and then we'll be good. It's okay, well, let's run through that process then, and let's see. So we ran through the process. As we're going through the fishbone process, the team said, hang on, do you know what? One of the things under process, we've never actually launched them. I've never seen them. I had a piece of A4 with 6 statements on them, but I didn't know what any of this was. And everyone else, is that true? Yeah, no, I didn't see it either. So suddenly, the problem wasn't the brand values. The problem was the fact nobody had launched them. So suddenly, when you fall in love with the problem, it's like, oh, great, well, now I know we'll launch them like this, and we'll do this, and it'd be great. We just saved the business probably the best part of £250,000 and 18 months worth of meaningless work. Because you can imagine, you go and do that work, and then you come back, you do exactly what you just did, and then 6 months later, these aren't landing either. We better make some more. You're in that endless loop. So really using that technique to hack the problem right down, changes your perspective. And even if you prioritize 3 or 4 of these different areas, you start to have some interesting solutions that you can put on the table. And quite often, by the way, none of the solutions rely on advertising, they rely on services, they rely on clarity of communication, they rely on chemistry, they rely on a whole load of different things. And therefore, it becomes a much more powerful way to reframe your mind.
Thank you. One more question.
I was really interested to see the WEF kind of change from the 10 to the 3 in terms of how creativity is getting ranked now. I can imagine that creativity, therefore, the distillation of the definition is maybe slightly more potent now for everyone. Now it has, I suppose, a nemesis with AI. How do you hire talent based on your creative superpowers? Because it strikes me that that's probably quite hard in terms of the questions you ask in interviews.
No, look, I've always had quite a lot of success hiring because I've always had the same point of view in terms of hiring people for like a broader creative department, and that is the word. It's like as broad as you can make it, as interesting as people are, as different a background as someone's got, as unconventional a path into creativity as they've had. It makes for a really interesting, like exciting person that I want to have on my team. People that do loads of stuff outside of work, I think are brilliant because they can handle their time better, and they're just taking stuff from different places and putting it together, and they're just inherently, I think, more creative. So as many side hustles as possible, please. And then, just being really conscious of I love a great portfolio, and I will always look at a portfolio before I look at someone's educational, and all of that kind of stuff, because I think otherwise you can funnel yourself through a couple of different universities without realising and what have you. So kind of portfolio first, but also taking into consideration the dynamic that person might have had around their portfolio. So, for example, I might see an amazing portfolio, kind of, I guess, coming back because I'm passionate about it, to more women in creative departments. I might see a woman's portfolio. It might not have the like really sexy, funny, pitch-winning stuff in it. It might have a lot of shampoo. That might not be because she only does shampoo. It might be because she's only been allowed to do it. So kind of spending time actually then, after I've seen great portfolios, trying to unpick the person around it and sort of thinking about them in the whole.
So I'm just going to finish. We've got 2.5 minutes. So I think so from my experience, there's a real risk that the advertising industry becomes the illiterate of the 21st century. Yeah. So I'm going to ask you very quickly, 30 seconds each, what's the one hack you think the industry needs to make sure it's not the illiterate of the 21st century?
Didn't do that in rehearsals.
Okay, I'll do one. I think the creative department being distinguished from everything else is just the most unhelpful thing. Unless we've got people who can solve problems of all sorts, big and small, who have side projects, who make stuff, who teach stuff, and we need to have them all and stop this silly barrier between creativity and making and
Right, thank you.
I'd say reframe value, but then that's because that's my client head. But reframe value, right? Advertising in and of itself is probably the wrong word to use these days. Advertising agency sounds like really 80s. Actually, it's half the time you're solving needs of consumers. You're creating commercial products. You're doing all sorts of different things. So it's the going in point should not be advertising. The going in point should be connecting with consumers, not being customer centric and all that. That's bullshit. It's like first and foremost, what does the customer need, and then how do we backfill that with really meaningful value? And if it is advertising, great, but more often than not, it might not be.
Right.
And I would just say, like, remove as much hierarchy as possible and sit back and listen rather than expect that you know the answer to everything.
Well, on that note, thank you for listening, everyone. We highly recommend it, obviously. For those two people who ask questions, please come to me afterwards. I have a little pin for you, Creative Superheroes pin. And if you want your own pin, please read the book. And if you enjoy it and send me your positive review, we'll send you a pin. So, thank you. Enjoy the rest of the festival.